دعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. ربي زدني علما، 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 ربي زدني علما. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وبقلب لا يخشى وبعمل لا يرفع بدعاء لا يسمع. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وبقلب لا يخشى وبعمل لا يرفع بدعاء لا يسمع. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وبقلب لا يخشى وبأمن لا يرفع ودعاء لا يسمع. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Um, First and foremost, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone, inshallah. We are just we'd like to welcome all of you first and foremost to the Ramadan Matters Conference, the actual opening of it now, inshallah ta'ala. Where we're going to be blessed, inshallah, over the next few days from tonight up until the 26th of February with the online open study with many, many esteemed guests from abroad, mashallah. So we'll have the likes of Al Habib Kadhim Al-Saqaf, inshallah, be joining us, Shaykh Mohammad Haddamin from Mauritania, Shaykh Mohammad Muwafaq Al-Murabbi, which is again from Syria, Shaykh Mohammad Darwish, inshallah, who's going to be joining us shortly, inshallah ta'ala. Then likewise also Shaykh Saleh Al-Murabbi, the son of Shaykh Mohammed, and then also Hakim, Shahid, Bukhari, inshallah ta'ala. We will speak about diet in Ramadan. Just a brief overview of the timetable, inshallah. The schedule is that today, inshallah, we'll have a session with Shaykh Mohammad Darwish. He's going to join us from Malaysia, inshallah, on a session on connecting to the Quran in the month of Ramadan. And then at 9 o'clock, inshallah, subsequently, straight after the class, there will be another very important reminder from Hakim Shahid Bukhari. Hakim Shahid Bukhari, mashallah, who'll be speaking about diet in the month of Ramadan, and the essential things that we should be eating and be avoiding in Ramadan. Tomorrow evening, inshallah, at 8 o'clock, it's going to be now going through the sacred law, the fiqh. So the fiqh in accordance to Imam Malik, the rules of fasting. Sheikh Mohammed Haddamin, inshallah ta'ala, will be opening that at 8 o'clock, and that will finish about 9:30. Then on Monday, it'll be the rules of fasting according to the Shafi'i school, again with Sheikh Mohammed Darwish, inshallah ta'ala. He'll be teaching that class. And then likewise, on the Tuesday, inshallah, at 8 p.m., it'll be the rules of fasting according to Imam Abu Hanifa and the Hanafi school, and that'll be with Sheikh Mohammed Muwafaq al-Murabbi and also Sheikh Saleh al-Murabbi, his son. The finale, inshallah, will take place on Wednesday, the 26th of February at 8 p.m., and that will be with Habib Kadhim al-Saqaf. He will be speaking about spirituality in the blessed month of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala, that will conclude, inshallah, the actual program. Just before Sheikh Mohammed actually joins us, inshallah ta'ala, we're just gonna mention a little bit about him for those of you that do not know him, inshallah ta'ala, just a little bit about the Sheikh that we have, inshallah, joining us. So Sheikh Mohammed has spent all his life in service of knowledge. He is from Damascus, Syria, where he took from some of the leading scholars of Syria, including Sheikh Abdul Razak al-Halabi, Sheikh Abib al-Kallas, Sheikh Abdul Fattah al-Bizam, Sheikh Muhammad Sa'id Ramaḍān al-Bhuti, and likewise Sheikh Nuruddin Itar. May Allah have mercy on their souls. He gained his ijaza, which is license to teach in Islamic knowledge, from the Mahad al-Fath al-Islami in Damascus, followed by his degree up to his PhD, which he received from Azhar University, Egypt. He taught many subjects across the Madrasa of Damascus from 1994 to 2012, after which he has been teaching in Imam Shafi'i University in Indonesia up until now. He has published a few of his works, most recently an updated version of Tafsir al-Nasafi, which was published in Turkey. The Sheikh likewise also, mashallah, he is extensive in his dawah in Indonesia, where he travels, mashallah, extensively in calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But likewise also, mashallah, we're honored because he's also one of the teachers that comes and teaches on the trodden path, on on the Trodden Path, the course that Greensville Trust has in the summertime or every summer, mashallah. The Sheikh is one of the renowned teachers that, mashallah, comes and gives from his time and gives from his experience, mashallah, to the students on the Trodden Path. So we're just awaiting him now, inshallah, to join us, inshallah, live from it's I think it's either Malaysia, possibly, or it could be Indonesia, inshallah, he's going to be joining us from. Um, and inshallah, he's going to speak about connecting to the Quran in the month of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. We'll just try and contact him now, inshallah. The Sheikh just mentioned he's just trying to log on now, inshallah. He'll be with us in a few minutes, inshallah ta'ala.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. شيخ محمد، كيف حالك؟
مرحبا أهلا شيخ عامر، الحمد لله الحمد لله، مشتاق لكم يا سيدي.
نحن
يا
مشتاقون.
مرحبا.
مشتاقون
الله
لكم أكثر إن
يحفظكم.
شاء الله. كيف حالكم؟ ما شاء الله.
الحمد لله الحمد لله، الله يحفظكم ويبارك فيكم.
في انتظاركم
الله
الآن إن شاء الله.
إن
إلى
شاء الله.
بريطانيا إن شاء الله.
الله يحفظكم، الله يبارك فيكم. نبدأ مباشرة نبدأ.
أي نعم إن شاء الله، بسم
إيه.
الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما، صلاة تفتح لنا أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير. أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما، صلاة تفتح لنا أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير. أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما، صلاة تفتح لنا أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير. أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. الحمد لله الذي أكرمنا بهذا اللقاء معكم ومع الإخوة على طاعة الله سبحانه وتعالى، وعلى ذكر شيء مما يرغبنا جميعا، والمتكلم أحوج من السامعين إلى هذا، يرغبنا جميعا في الاستعداد لهذا الشهر العظيم، هذا الموسم العظيم، وخاصة الاستعداد لاغتنام خيرات ودقائق أوقات هذا الشهر العظيم بتلاوة كتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى.
After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending prayers and blessings upon our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sahbihi wasallam, Shaykh Muhammad, he proceeds by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and saying, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to gather, inshallah, in a gathering of His remembrance and His obedience, inshallah, and in a gathering which will, inshallah, motivate us, all of us, with what we're going to hear, inshallah ta'ala, in terms of approaching the month of Ramadan with a stronger connection to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وسيدنا الإمام الغزالي رضي الله تعالى عنه في كتابه العظيم ميزان العمل له كلام عظيم يحث الإنسان على الرغبة في الخير، والرغبة في طلب السعادة الدائمة في الجنة يوم القيامة.
So, mashallah, our master and our teacher, Abu Hamd al-Ghazali, who mentions in his book, Mizan al-Amal, he actually mentions in that particular text about those works, inshallah ta'ala, that a person should desire to perform to allow them to reach felicity, yani forevermore with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the abode to come.
فالآن الاستعداد لشهر رمضان، اغتنام شهر رمضان، اغتنام أوقات ودقائق شهر رمضان بتلاوة القرآن الكريم، هذا من السعي إلى السعادة الأخروية الدائمة.
And so Shaykh Mohammed mentions that us preparing for the month of Ramadan by taking advantage of the opportunity of the month of Ramadan from the minutes and the seconds and the hours of Ramadan by engaging with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our wayfaring, inshallah ta'ala, to felicity in the hereafter forevermore.
والإمام الغزالي رحمه الله يقول في هذا الكتاب العظيم، يقول الفتور، يعني وضع ذكر هو عنوان في البحث، قال بيان أن الفتور عن طلب السعادة حماقة.
Mhm.
الفتور عن طلب السعادة حماقة، هذا عنوان عجيب سبحان الله.
And so Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he actually mentions that breakfast, seeking breakfast, فطور ايش؟ طلبة السعادة.
الفتور عن طلب السعادة حماقة، قلة عقل، يعني الذي لا يطلب السعادة، الذي يفتر ويتباطأ ويتكاسل عن طلب السعادة أحمق هذا.
So a person who breaks his fast and does not seek the hereafter is complete stupidity. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali mentions, person who breaks their fast and does not seek the hereafter, that is complete and utter idiocy.
ثم يقول السعادة الأخروية السعادة الأخروية هي بقاء بلا فناء.
Why? Because he said felicity in the hereafter is something which remains and it will never end.
ولذة بلا عناء، لذة بدون تعب، ما في تعب، لذة فقط.
And he said it's pleasure without being tiresome, meaning that you'll attain pleasure without striving for it.
وسرور بلا كدورة، سرور يعني راحة هكذا، ما فيها شيء ينغص هذه السعادة.
And he said, and it's eternal bliss and happiness, and nothing will remove that eternal bliss and happiness from a person.
وغنى بلا فقر، غنى بلا فقر.
And it's real wealth without any poverty, without experiencing poverty evermore.
وكمالا بلا نقصان،
Yeah.
كمال بلا نقصان.
And it's completeness without being deficient in anything whatsoever.
وعزا بلا ذل.
And it's might or veneration without humiliation.
ثم هو يصور كيف يعني أنها دائمة وطويلة ولا انقطاع لها، يضرب مثال جميل لهذا.
And so obviously the example he gives now, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he gives a picture or gives an analogy of how you can imagine this to be in a really beautiful way.
قال تصور لو أن الدنيا التي نعيش فيها مملوءة بالذرة، حبات الذرة، كل الدنيا مملوءة بحبات الذرة.
So he said, imagine that the entire world that you live in is filled with like seeds. Now, dhura like seeds.
قال وقدرنا أن هناك طائر يأخذ كل ألف سنة حبة واحدة، في كل ألف سنة يأخذ حبة واحدة منها.
And he said, so can you imagine a bird? Just imagine in your mind that the entire world is full of these seeds, and a bird every 1,000 years takes one of those seeds. That's it, just one of those seeds.
قال لفنيت الذرة كلها من الكرة الأرضية ولم ينقضي أبد الآباد. يعني هو يصور الدوام، كيف أن الشيء الزمن دائم يوم القيامة لا ينقطع. قال لو انتهت لتنتهي الذرة ولا ينتهي الزمن.
And so here you'll notice that you can't ever imagine that ending, that it will be like that forever, that a bird would come every 1,000 years and take a few. You can't ever imagine that the earth would end with having no seeds in it whatsoever. Even if you imagine right until the day of judgment, you'd realize that the seeds would remain. It's impossible for the seeds to actually to perish altogether.
قال فهذه السعادة، هذه السعادة التي تدوم هذا الدوام الطويل مع كمالها، من يفتر عنها؟ من يفتر عن طلبها؟
He said, so how can a person who knows that this sa'adah, this felicity will remain forevermore, how can they lose this? I mean, how can they lose this opportunity of attaining that?
قال فكل عاقل يتسارع إلى أقل منها. لو كان أقل من هذا السعادة كل عاقل سيسرع إليها.
No. So every intelligent person would strive for this. That's what the Sheikh's trying to say. Every intelligent person would strive for this what? This felicitous or this felicity.
قال والعاقل يتيسر عليه ترك القليل نقدا، ترك القليل نقدا في طلب أضعافه نسيئة. والعاقل يعني الشيء الآن العاجل تتركه إذا كان قليلا لتأخذ أضعافه مؤجلا.
And so he said the intelligent person will leave and go without that which is present right now, will decrease in this world a little bit for that which is to come, which is going to have plenitude and it will remain forevermore, meaning they'll decrease in what they have of this world for the hereafter.
ويقول هذا في الدنيا موجود الآن، التاجر يدفع القليل الآن ليربح الأضعاف المضاعفة بعد مدة.
And
فهذا مثل، نعم.
now, so we see an example like just this is in everyday life. For example, people who are engaged in trade, like businessmen and women, for example, they will take a short-term loss for a long-term gain. They'll pay something little now, which will take out their pocket, but they know in the future it's going to come back to them through different types of profits they're going to make from it. So we can see that example now already in the dunya.
فهذه خلاصة يسيرة مما قاله في هذا البحث في الكتاب. كلامه أطول لكن نحن أخذنا خلاصة يسيرة يعني تشوقنا إلى أن نرجع إلى الكتاب أكثر وأكثر.
MashaAllah. And so Shaykh Mohammed says this is just a brief summary of the book. The book is quite a lengthy book and it brings many different examples, but this should be enough, inshallah ta'ala, to give us desire to strive for our hereafter, inshallah, and we'll return back to the book when we need to.
فنحن الآن في هذا الموسم في شهر رمضان، نحن الآن نتعب في تلاوة القرآن تعبا يسيرا حتى نحصد السعادة الدائمة يوم القيامة إن شاء الله.
And so Shaykh Mohammed says, and the point of being what I've just said is that in this month of Ramadan, that we exhaust ourselves and we tire ourselves with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we receive this felicity, eternal felicity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while striving with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed month.
وسيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: اقرأوا القرآن فإنه يأتي يوم القيامة شفيعا لأصحابه أصحاب القرآن الملازمون لتلاوته.
And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he mentioned, just to paraphrase the hadith, recite the Quran because verily it will come as an intercessor for its companion on the day of judgment. And Shaykh Muhammad mentioned that this means the one who's constantly connected to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, constantly going back to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will intercede for that person on the day of judgment.
والمداومة على تلاوة كتاب الله عز وجل تورث محبة الله لعباده. ربنا عز وجل يقول: وما يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. فنحن ننال هذه المنزلة بالمداومة على التلاوة إن شاء الله في رمضان وغيره.
MashaAllah. And so being consistent with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside of Ramadan and outside of Ramadan, constantly returning back to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this will be a cause for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the slave. As the hadith mentions, that my slave draws near to me through voluntary acts until I love him. So by constantly connecting to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside and outside of Ramadan, we become beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
لذلك نحن إن شاء الله نحاول جميعا أخواني في هذا الشهر العظيم أن نقلل من الأعمال التي ليست ضرورية مما تشغلنا من مشاغل الحياة، نقلل حتى نصرف معظم أوقاتنا في تلاوة كتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى.
So Shaykh Mohammed mentions, my dear brothers and sisters, that now with the month of Ramadan that's coming up, we lessen the type of work which distracts us from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That work which is not necessary to do, that work which is just distracting us, we should lessen that in order that we spend most of our time with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reading and engaging the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وكلما انتهينا من ختمة مباشرة نشرع في ختمة جديدة إن شاء الله.
And inshallah, as soon as we've completed the Quran, done a khatam of the Quran, then immediately we should begin a new recitation. Immediately.
وسيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لما سئل أي الأعمال أحب إلى الله تعالى قال: الذي يضرب من أول القرآن إلى آخره كلما حل ارتحل كلما حل ارتحل كلما انتهى بدأ بختمة جديدة. هذه أحب الأعمال إلى الله سبحانه وتعالى.
MashaAllah. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked on one occasion, what is the most beloved of actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, a person who begins the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he reads through it and then he comes to the completion of it. And as soon as he's completed it, he begins it again. And he mentioned that this is the most beloved of actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Beginning the Quran, completing the Quran, and then beginning it again.
وسيدنا الشيخ عبد الله سراج الدين رضي الله عنه وأرضاه لما أورد هذا الحديث قال بعده كلاما عظيما، تكلم بعده بكلام عظيم سبحان الله. الآن إن شاء الله نحاول أن نسمعه جميعا ما شاء الله بقلوب هكذا حاضرة إن شاء الله.
Ameen, ameen. So, inshallah, Shaykh Mohammed said, bring our hearts present now to what we're going to hear. Because this hadith that we mentioned, that our dear and beloved teacher, Shaykh Abdullah Siraj Adin, Allah have mercy on him, that he, when we took this hadith from him, he gave us some words which were amazing regarding this hadith that we hadn't heard before. He says, so I'm asking everyone to bring their hearts present when they heard the speech or the commentary of what Shaykh Abdullah Siraj Adin, may Allah have mercy on him, what he said about this hadith.
قال: وفي هذا الحديث دليل واضح لمن يريد السير والسلوك تقربا إلى ملك الملوك. الله أكبر يا شيخ عامر، إيش هذا؟ الله أكبر. تقرب إلى ملك الملوك. ملك الملوك نحن نتقرب إليه.
الله.
ربي عز وجل دلنا على باب عظيم في القرب من ملك الملوك. ماذا يساوي كل ما في الدنيا، ماذا يساوي أمام هذا؟ الله أكبر.
He said the speech, which was bewildering that we heard, and he said, and how, I mean, how amazing the speech is. He says, for any single person who follows this hadith and implements it by reading the Quran, finishing it, and beginning again, he said, this is their wayfaring and spiritual wayfaring to proximity to the Lord of all the dominions. He said, how is that even possible? What other act in the world can allow you to draw closer to God Almighty like this? He said the Sheikh, actually the way he said it to Malik al-Muluk, that the king of all the dominions, by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you move in proximity to him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar.
قال: وذلك بأن يتابع تلاوة الختمات فإن فيها حلا وارتحالا. يتابع الختمات،
Yeah.
هذا فيه حل وارتحال. سبحان الله.
And so a person, for example, who completes the khatam of the Quran, this is a source of like solution for all of their problems as well. And also a source of ease for that person who begins the Quran, finishes it, and begins it again.
قال: وينتج ذلك قربا واتصالا. وينتج ذلك قربا واتصالا.
And the fruits of that will be connection and عفوا أعيد مرة ثانية when you هذا.
نعم. وينتج ذلك قربا واتصالا.
And so the results of this will be proximity and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
لأن هذا لأن هذا لأن هذا السير هو السير السريع. لأن هذا السير هو السير السريع المنيع. السير إلى الله عز وجل سريع بهذا. سبحان
Yeah.
الله.
Why? Because this wayfaring is the quickest wayfaring to arrive at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the quickest way to arrive at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
ولا أسرع منه كما أرشدنا إليه سيدنا رسول الله صلى
Allah.
الله عليه وسلم.
And there's nothing quicker than this to arrive at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he guided us towards this.
وربنا سبحانه وتعالى من رحمته وكرمه أنه جعل لكل حرف نقرأه 10 حسنات. هذا من فضل الله ونعمته علينا.
And so from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the blessings that He bestowed upon this ummah, that for every single letter which is recited, that there's a reward of 10 hasanat, 10 good deeds for every single letter which is recited.
قال: وهذا الأمر هذا في غير رمضان، لكن رمضان هذا شهر الخيرات، فربما تضاعف أكثر من ذلك بكثير.
And so Shaykh Mohammad Hafidhullah Ta'ala mentioned that this is outside of Ramadan. A person who recites the Quran outside of Ramadan receives at the very least 10 rewards or 10 good deeds for every single letter. He said, and it's possible, and it is in the fact in the month of Ramadan, that when a person recites it, there's an increase. They receive more than 10 for every single letter that they have recited.
وسبحان الله، تلاوة القرآن مع الثواب ومع الأجر الذي يحصل العبد عليه، يحصل على مزية عظيمة وهي مجالسة الملائكة. فتلاوة القرآن من أسباب مجالسة الملائكة. سبحان الله.
And one of the great and unique attributes of the recitation of the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that a person is sitting in the gatherings of the angels, that the angels are present with a person when they're engaging and reciting the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a unique feature of the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
فكل واحد منا يحب ويتمنى ويرغب بمجالسة الصالحين، والملائكة من أصلح الصالحين. فأنت إذا قرأت القرآن تجالس الصالحين.
She says, so Sheikh Muhammad mentions all of us, we desire to sit in the companion in the company of the righteous. And he said, and the most righteous of creatures are the angels. He says, so every time that you recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are sitting with the righteous of Allah's creation, which are his angels, those unique beings made of light.
فسيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: إن البيت إذا قرئ فيه القرآن حضرته الملائكة.
The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, he mentioned if a house in which the Quran is recited, the angels attend the house, they gather in the house.
قال: وتباعدت تنكبت عنه الشياطين، تباعدت عنه الشياطين.
And likewise, also demons and devils, they distance themselves from the house.
قال: واتسع على أهله. اتسع، سعة معنوية ولو كان صغيرا
No.
في الناحية المحسوسة.
And so here there's an expansion in the house, and here this is not a physical expansion. The house can be a small house, but there's an expansion, meaning in the hearts of the people in the house.
وكثر خيره، كثر خيره، وهنا الخير معناه واسع، قد يكون صلاحا للأولاد إن شاء الله، هذا من الخير الذي يكون فيه.
And there's an increase in goodness. And Shaykh Mohammed mentions goodness is it's expansive, the word goodness. He said, for example, an increase in goodness could mean the rectification or the righteousness of the children in the house, that they become righteous due to the presence of the Quran being recited in the house. It's very expansive when it says there's a lot of goodness, there's an increase in goodness. It's an expansive term to use.
قال: وقل شره، قل شره.
No. And likewise, there's a decrease in evilness in the house. It's lessened.
وقد نعم، وقد يكون يعني مما يدخل في هذا قلة الشر، زوال الخصومات في البيت، يعني بعض البيوت فيها خصومات بين الزوج والزوجة لأتفه الأسباب، فالمداومة على تلاوة القرآن تصرف هذا بإذن الله.
And so Sheikh Mohammed mentions that what it means by lessening evil from the ways of that, he mentioned a few examples. One is that people that won't visit the house, that they're not bad people that visit the house, but also problems in the house between spouses, between what, like a husband and a wife, there's constant argumentation and constant fighting, etc. That you find by the recitation of the Quran, that is lessened a lot by the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وجاء في الحديث الذي يرويه الإمام البيهقي عن سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: البيت الذي يقرأ فيه القرآن يتراءى لأهل السماء كما تتراءى النجوم لأهل الأرض. كيف نحن نرى النجوم مضيئة؟ الملائكة ترى بيوتنا هكذا مثل النجوم مضيئة، سبحان الله.
MashaAllah. And the hadith which Imam Bayhaqi he brings, in which our Prophet, our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, houses in which the Quran is recited, the inhabitants of the heavens look and gaze upon those houses in which the Quran is recited, just like the inhabitants of the earth, that they gaze upon the stars in the sky, meaning that the loci for the gaze of the angels and inhabitants of the heavens are the houses in which the Quran are recited.
وكذلك جاء في الحديث أيضا، هذا رواه الإمام البيهقي، يقول سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: نوروا منازلكم بالصلاة وقراءة القرآن.
And again, another narration that comes by Imam Bayhaqi, which mentions that our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, illuminate your houses by performing the prayer within them and by recitation of the Quran. By the Quran being recited, that's how you illuminate your house.
وبعض العلماء يقول: البيوت تربى كما تربى الأولاد. كيف تربي الولد على الصلاح؟ تربي بيتك على الصلاح أيضا.
MashaAllah. So some of the ulama mentioned just the way you rear your children in prayer, you also rear your house, meaning you make your house, you rear your house in prayer as well by the recitation of the Quran. You make it a place where people want to pray in as well.
لذلك تجد بيوت الصالحين الذاكرين التي فيها الذكر والطاعة، إذا جلست فيها تشعر بسكينة وطمأنينة عجيبة، وإن كانت من حيث المظاهر هي بسيطة جدا، سبحان الله.
MashaAllah. And Shaykh Muhammad mentions that, for example, the houses of the righteous and the houses of the people who make much remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when you enter their houses, they may be simple houses, but when you sit there, you have a sense of calmness and relaxation in those houses due to the constant remembrance of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It brings ease to the people when they come to the house.
من أيام واحد هنا من أحد الإخوة هنا يسألني بعض الأسئلة، وقال لي: لماذا نحن نجد أحيانا بعض البيوت كبيرة وفاخرة وبيوت أغنياء ومزينة وفيها لكن ما نطمئن، ما نستريح فيها إذا جلسنا. ما السر في هذا؟ قلت له: السر هذا أنها لم تربى هذه البيوت على الذكر والطاعات. سبحان الله.
Allah. So Shaykh Mohammed mentioned that one of the students asked him one time that, sometimes, when we go to houses which are really big houses, mashallah, and they have a lot of things and a lot of fruit, you're well served in those houses, but you don't find contentment and peace in those houses. You don't feel like you can relax in those houses. And Shaykh Mohammed said because many of those houses, they're not reared in prayer. They're not reared on the prayer meeting. They're not reared by the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those places. So you can enter a place and you feel, constrained, and you feel like you want to leave quite quickly because the Quran is not recited in those houses. No.
وأحد الصحابة الكرام سأل سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، قال: ألم ترى لثابت بن قيس؟ هذا ثابت بن قيس أحد الصحابة. فصحابي آخر يسأل عنه، يقول: ألم ترى لثابت بن قيس لم تزل داره تزهر مصابيح، يعني كأننا رأينا فوق داره هكذا مصابيح تزهر. فهم يسألون سيدنا رسول الله عن ذلك، عن سبب هذا صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So one of the companions, companions of the Prophet asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do you not see the house of Thabit ibn Qais, who's another companion, that every time that we go past his house, it's as if there's lights being shined in his house, they're emanating from his house.
فقال سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: فلعله قرأ سورة البقرة، لعله قرأ سورة البقرة.
And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, perhaps that he recites Surah Al-Baqarah in the house.
قال: فسئل سيدنا ثابت فقال: نعم قرأت سورة البقرة. سبحان الله.
So the companion, he went and asked Sayyidina Thabit ibn Qais, yeah, I asked him, do you recite Surah Al-Baqarah in the house? And he says, yes, I recite Surah Al-Baqarah in the house.
قال: وتلاوة القرآن من أسباب حفظ الملائكة للقارئ.
And so likewise, the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a means of the angels protecting the one who recites.
في سنن الترمذي عن سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ما من مسلم يأخذ مضجعه فيقرأ سورة من كتاب الله تعالى، يريد أن ينام، يقرأ سورة، إلا وكل الله له ملكا فلا يقربه شيء يؤذيه حتى هب من نومه. هذا الملك يحرسه بتلاوة سورة قبل النوم، الملك يحرسه طيلة نومه
حتى يستيقظ أو حتى ينام.
حتى يستيقظ. نعم، حتى يستيقظ.
And so
يعني هو قبل النوم قرأ سورة، وهو نائم يحرسه الملك.
MashaAllah. The hadith which comes in Tirmidhi, in which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, there's not a single Muslim that recites a chapter from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prior to sleeping, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He entrusts an angel to guard over that person until they sleep, until they wake up, and no harm will afflict that individual. That the angels protect that person whilst they're asleep.
وفي سنن الترمذي عن سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ثلاثة يحبهم الله عز وجل.
And another hadith in Tirmidhi mentioned, the Sunnah of Tirmidhi mentions three individuals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah loves them.
قال: رجل من هؤلاء الثلاثة رجل قام من الليل يتلو كتاب الله تعالى.
And the
سبحان الله، هذا تعرض لمحبة الله لهم.
Allahu Akbar. And from the one of them that was mentioned is a man who stands in the middle of the night reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stands in night prayer reciting the book of Allah.
قال: ورجل تصدق صدقة بيمينه يخفيها عن شماله، يعني هذا أسر الصدقة أيضا.
And so the second one is a person who gives in charity and his left hand does not know what his right hand gives, meaning he gives it in private. He doesn't tell people what he gives.
نعم. قال: ورجل كان في سرية فانهزم أصحابه فاستقبل العدو، يعني هذا كان في حال جهاد.
And the third was a person who goes out on a military expedition and he confronts the enemy before his brother. So this in fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
نعم. فمن يعني تلاوة القرآن لا تنتهي أسرارها وبركاتها وخيراتها.
And so the recitation of the book, there's no end to the blessings and to the lights and the secrets contained within it.
والشيخ عبد الله سراج الدين رضي الله عنه وأرضاه يقول: فأكثر أيها المسلم من تلاوة القرآن في بيتك ليتسع خلقك ورزقك وليطيب عيشك. ثلاثة أشياء:
And so
ليتسع
no?
خلقك ورزقك وليطيب عيشك. سبحان الله.
And so here, Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin says, so, O believer, increase in the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your house so that you will increase in good character in your rizq and also it will beautify your house. No.
والشيخ عبد الله سراج الدين أيضا يبين فائدة في تلاوة القرآن. عندما يقرأ القرآن هناك من يسمعه، قال: هذا ينال شرف تبليغ القرآن الكريم.
SubhanAllah. And so there's another benefit that Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin he mentioned about recitation of the Quran, in which those who heard him mention it said, SubhanAllah, this is something which can be obtained or the honor obtained by conveying the Quran.
وفي صحيح البخاري يقول سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: بلغوا عني ولو آية، بلغوا عني ولو آية.
And the hadith which mentions in Sahih Bukhari, which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, convey on behalf of me, even if it's one ayah, even if it's one ayah of the Quran.
قالوا: هذا الحديث فيه ثلاثة أشياء. هذا فيه تكليف وتشريف وتخفيف. تكليف: بلغوا.
No.
عني: تشريف، ولو آية تخفيف.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. MashaAllah. Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin said there's three affairs in this particular ayah. One which is taklif, which you're ordered to do something. And that comes with the order, the Prophet said, ballighu, which is an order, convey. And then the tashrif, the honor, anni, meaning on behalf of the Prophet. That's honor. And the last one is takhfif, which is ease. Why? Because the Prophet said one ayah. So here we have an order, which is convey, honor on behalf of me, and then ease, even if it's one ayah. So we have those three things contained within that one hadith, that one saying of the Prophet. Subhanallah. Ajib.
هذا التشريف معنى لطيف جدا. يعني أنت عندما تستشعر هذا المعنى شيء جميل جدا. أنت تبلغ عنه عن سيد الأولين والآخرين. كم تعلو منزلتك. سبحان الله.
And this is something that you should realize that subhanAllah that you're conveying on behalf of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's your honor. That's your honor. So you should convey whatever you can. You should convey because it's on behalf of him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's your honor in this world. No,
لذلك سفير الدولة الآن، الدولة عندما تضع سفير في دولة أخرى، السفير له منزلة، له مكانة. لماذا؟ هذا يبلغ عن دولته.
no. So we see like now, for example, many countries of the world, they have ambassadors, and those ambassadors, they speak on behalf of the heads of those countries. When they go to different lands, they speak on behalf of the heads of those countries.
قال الشيخ عبد الله سراج الدين رضي الله عنه: فينبغي لمن يتلو كلام الله تعالى على عباده أن يقصد بذلك التقرب إلى الله تعالى والتبليغ. يقصد التقرب والتبليغ.
And so here, Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin, he mentions, Allah have mercy on his soul, he says, so it's appropriate that a person, that when they convey the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when they mention the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that first and foremost, there should be an intention of drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the second intention should be in conveying the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
قال سبحان الله: ومن عظمة هذا القرآن الكريم، من عظمة هذا القرآن الكريم أن الله عز وجل يسر حفظه، فحفظ القرآن لمن يعني قصد ذلك وأراده وبذل الهمة، هذا ميسر سبحان الله.
And from the amazing nature of the Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy for people to memorize. For those who have a right intention, inshallah, and they have determination with that intention, then it's made easy for those individuals to memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وجاء في الحديث القدسي ربنا عز وجل يخاطب سيدنا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: وأنزلت عليك كتابا لا يغسله الماء. أنزلت عليك كتابا لا يغسله الماء، يعني هذا في الصدور، الذي في الصدور لا يغسل بالماء.
MashaAllah. And the Hadith Qudsi, which is it's a hadith which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and and he says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that this book that we have revealed upon you, it cannot be washed away with water. And what that means is that it's revealed and it's preserved in the hearts of people, and it can't be washed away like something on your limbs, something physical. It's in your soul and the hearts of individuals.
وجاء عن سيدنا أبي أمامة رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قال، هذا من قول سيدنا أبي أمامة: اقرأوا القرآن ولا تغرنكم هذه المصاحف المعلقة. يعني بعض الناس يعلق المصحف في بيته ولا يقرأ فيه، هذا لا يفيده كثيرا.
So Abu Umama, he mentions, he says, read the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not be deluded by the pages of the Mus'haf. ما معنى هذا؟ لا تغركم
ولا تغرنكم هذه المصاحف المعلقة، يعني لا تكتفي بأن تعلق المصحف في بيتك على الجدار على الرف دون أن تقرأ فيه.
And so he said, don't be deluded by these Mus'hafs by just leaving them on your shelves or leaving them in a high place and just leaving them there, meaning you need to recite it.
قال: فإن الله لا يعذب قلبا وعى القرآن، فإن الله تعالى لا يعذب قلبا وعى القرآن، حمل القرآن.
Why? Because, and he continues by saying, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not punish a person whose heart contains the Quran.
لذلك واحد يحاول أن يحفظ ما استطاع، إذا لم يحفظ كل القرآن فليحفظ بعضه، هذا يكون في قلبه حماية من عذاب الله عز وجل.
And so here, then a person should try their utmost to memorize what they're able to from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it will serve as a protection for that person.
هذا سبحان الله سيدنا أبو أمامة رضي الله عنه حصلت له قصة عجيبة فيها كرامة عظيمة له، وهي معجزة لسيدنا رسول الله
So,
عليه الصلاة والسلام.
so Abu Umama, there was a really amazing miracle that occurred, a karama that occurred on his hand, but it was actually from the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
هذه ذكرها الإمام البيهقي في دلائل النبوة.
And so Imam Bayhaqi mentions this book in the proofs of prophecy.
سيدنا أبو أمامة لما دخل في الإسلام أرسله سيدنا رسول الله عليه السلام إلى قومه ليدعوهم إلى الإسلام.
So Abu Umama, when he embraced Islam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent him to his people to call them to Islam.
فلما ذهب إليهم وجدهم يأكلون الميت والدم، دعوه إلى يأكل معهم، قال: أنا جئت لأنهاكم عن هذا، أنا ما أكله.
So when he went to his people, he found them eating like dead carcasses, eating dead meat and eating and eating the blood of it. And they invited him to eat it, and he said, "I haven't come to engage in this."
قال: فيعني أسمعوه كلاما قاسيا مؤذيا فتركهم وابتعد عنهم.
And so he heard like some really foul and harsh words from them. So he left them and he departed from them.
وكان في سفره ذلك في جوع وتعب، ولكن نام فحصل له في الرؤيا رزق، ربي رزقه وهو نائم الطعام والشراب.
MashaAllah. And so he left them, and even though he was really hungry, that he left them and he distanced himself from them. And as he's traveling, he fell asleep. And in his dream, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him food and drink, his rizq in a dream, which sustained him.
فبعد ذلك قومه ندموا، بعضهم قال لبعض: كيف تركتم هذا أبا أمامة؟ ما تقدموا له الطعام، ما تقدموا له الشراب. ندموا، ذهبوا إليه حتى يعتذروا منه ويقدموا له شيء من الطعام.
And so after a short while, some of the people from his own people, they were really remorseful and they felt bad and they were saying to others, how can you send, one of our sons away and you didn't give him any food, you didn't give him anything to drink while he came. He refused what you were eating, but you didn't offer him anything, and now you left him to go hungry. So they found out where he was and they wanted to go and apologize to him.
قال لهم: لا حاجة لي بطعامكم وشرابكم، الله عز وجل أطعمني وسقاني.
So he turns around to his people, and even though they came with food and drink, he says, I have no need of your food and drink, because my Lord has already provided me with food and drink.
قال سبحان الله: فدخلوا في الإسلام كلهم بسبب هذه الكرامة، دخلوا في الإسلام.
Due to this miracle, mashallah, that occurred, karama that occurred on his hand, the entire community became Muslim on his hand.
فهذه كرامة لسيدنا أبي أمامة، وهي في نفس الوقت معجزة لسيدنا رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام.
And so this was a karama of the Sahabi al-Jaleel, but also from the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
الشيخ عبد الله سراج الدين يذكر فائدة، يقول: حفظ سائر القرآن فرض كفاية وسنة عين. حفظ سائر القرآن، كل القرآن، جميع القرآن، هو فرض كفاية. حفظ القرآن كله في نفس الوقت هو سنة عين.
Now, also, so Sheikh Sirajuddin, he mentions to memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a fard kifaya, it's a communal obligation, but also it's an individual sunnah. It's a sunnah aini, which is its individual sunnah as well. So it's a communal obligation in terms of the community, but in terms of individual, it's sunnah for the person to memorize the Quran. No.
قال: وهو أفضل من صلاة النفل. الاشتغال بحفظ القرآن أفضل من صلاة النفل.
And so actually memorizing the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more virtuous than praying voluntary prayers.
فهذا الذي يشتغل بحفظ كتاب الله، إذا أخذ القرآن وقته في المراجعة والحفظ، فهذا في خير، وإن قصر في صلوات النافلة.
So a person who's memorizing the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or revising the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is more virtuous than a person who's praying supererogatory or voluntary prayers.
سبحان الله، سيدنا عمر رضي الله عنه في خلافته كان يعطي رواتب مالية لحفاظ القرآن. أنت
Wow.
حافظ كتاب الله، تأخذ راتب في آخر الشهر. سبحان الله.
Shaykh Mohammed mentioned that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that if a person was memorizing the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they'd memorize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would give them a monthly salary, to give them a monthly salary because they memorized the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
وجاء في سنن الترمذي أيضا عن سيدنا أبي أمامة رضي الله عنه يقول: ما أذن الله تعالى لعبد في شيء أفضل من ركعتين أو أكثر من ركعتين. يعني ما أذن الله، يعني الإذن هو الرضا والقبول، معنى ذلك هذا فيه حث على صلاة النافلة والصلاة
And,
عامة يعني.
and so Abu Umama, he mentions in the hadith in Tirmidhi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not permit anything better, meaning there's no greater reward than a person who prays 2 rakah. Naam.
قال: وإن البر ليذر فوق رأس العبد ما دام في صلاته. يعني وهو يصلي
Naam.
تتنزل عليه من الله الخير والبركة والرحمة ما دام في صلاته.
So as long as a person remains in prayer, then the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perpetually on the person as long as they're in prayer. It doesn't cease.
قال: وما تقرب العبد إلى الله تعالى بمثل ما خرج منه. يعني هنا خرج منه بمعنى أنه هو الذي أنزله، وهو القرآن الكريم. ما تقرب العبد إلى الله بمثل ما خرج منه، يعني من أعظم القربات تلاوة القرآن.
And there's nothing that a slave draws closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that which emanates from him. And what the meaning of the hadith here is the Quran that they're reciting is the closest means of them drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the means of them drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that which emanates from them, the Quran they're reciting.
والإمام البزار يروي أيضا حديثا عجيبا سبحان الله عن سيدنا رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام قال العبد إن العبد إذا تسوك قام ونظف أسنانه بالسواك أو الآن الفرشاة بنية السواك ثم قام يصلي وهو في الصلاة بعد أن استاك يصلي قال يأتي الملك يستمع لقراءته الملك يستمع لقراءته حتى يضع الملك فاه عند فم القارئ أنت تقرأ والملك فمه عند فمك
الله
فعندما يقرأ القراءة تدخل في فم الملك في جوف الملك
الله
سبحان الله
الله
سبحان
Allah.
الله
SubhanAllah, Ajib, a hadith that's mentioned that a person who wakes from prayer and they use the miswak or they use like a toothbrush and then they pray, he says that an angel arrives as they're praying, and then as they're reciting Quran, the angel places its mouth over the mouth of the person who's reciting Quran. And he said he said you're reciting Quran into the mouth of an angel. Allahu Akbar.
لذلك في هذا الحديث يقول عليه السلام يقول فطهروا أفواهكم للقرآن طهروا أفواهكم للقرآن نظف الفم ليكون مكان طيب لتلاوة القرآن.
And so here, and that's why the hadith mentions فطهروا, so clean and purify your tongues with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No.
الملائكة يعني ترتاح للرائحة الطيبة من الإنسان.
And so the angels, I mean, they're drawn close to and they're ecstatic with dua, with the recitation from the smell of the recitation of the Quran from the person who's reciting it.
لذلك نسأل الله أن يرزقنا الهمة العظيمة
Ameen,
في
ameen.
تلاوة القرآن في رمضان وفي أعمالنا كلها إن شاء الله.
And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us, inshallah, an increase in aspiration and with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in all good works inside of Ramadan and outside of Ramadan, inshallah.
ولا ننسى أننا عندما نقرأ هكذا دائما نستعين بالله أن يرزقنا الإخلاص في تلاوة القرآن نقرأ بنية خالصة تقربا إلى الله سبحانه وتعالى.
And we should not forget that every time that we read the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should intend sincerity in our drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that we are reciting it purely to draw closer in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
أظن نفتح باب السؤال للإخوة الآن.
Inshallah. Now, so we're going to ask Shaykh Mohammed is just going to have a few minutes for questions. نعم سيدي موجود هنا سؤال هل أفضل أن نقضي معظم وقتنا في تلاوة أو وقت للحفظ والتفسير والتدبر أيضا. So the question
آه،
is it best that we spend most of our time in recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or in memorizing and in tafsir and in pondering over the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
نعم نعم لا شك يعني أن التدبر يزيد من ثواب تلاوة القرآن فهذا أفضل نعم يقسم أوقاته بعضها للحفظ وبعضها لفهم معاني كتاب الله سبحانه وتعالى.
And so Shaykh Mohammed says it's better that a person arranges their time where part of the time is for memorization and part of the time is for reflection on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because tadabbur, which is reflecting on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it increases the reward with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No.
لأن هذا التدبر والفهم هو من أسباب التعليم يعني أنت ستعلم غيرك معاني هذه الآيات فهذا نفعه متعدي أكثر من ثوابه أكثر من النفع القاصر على صاحبه.
Why? Because tadabbur, reflecting on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reciting and reading tafsir of the Quran, this is something which is going to benefit other people. Whereas hifd of Quran, primarily it benefits the one who's memorizing. But reading tafsir and contemplating over the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's going to have more benefit for people outside of yourself. So there should be what there should be no. نعم سيدي.
لكن بخصوص رمضان وقت التلاوة أكثر هذا في خصوص رمضان وقت التلاوة أكثر لأنه شهر التلاوة
Now, and so which is specific to Ramadan, a person should increase more in reading the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recitation, more than tafsir and more than tadabbur. That's something which is peculiar to Ramadan only. Why? Because it's the month in which the Quran should be recited plentiful. So outside of Ramadan, tafsir and tadabbur more can be you can spread your time out, but in Ramadan most of your time should be in recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نعم. Uh,
الأوقات لها خصوصيات. أحد الصالحين كان في شهري ربيع كلها في الصلاة على سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. في شهري ربيع كل الشهرين هي صلاة على سيدنا رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام.
And why? Because certain months and certain times have unique things. And so the Sheikh mentioned that some of the righteous, that for the two Rabi al-Awwal and Rabi al-Thani, they'd spend the entire 2 months in salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because that time is unique to salawat. So what the Sheikh's trying to say is the month of Ramadan is unique to the recitation of the Quran. No.
نعم.
قال واحد يسأل هل ممكن واحد يستمع إلى القرآن هل هذا نفس التأثير والبركة ممن يقرأ القرآن نفس
آه، ثواب القارئ أكثر من المستمع، لكن المستمع أيضا فيه أجر عظيم. استماع القرآن فيه أجر عظيم، لكن لا يستمع من المسجل، لأن هذا الاستماع من المسجل يعني لا ينال ما كما يناله من قارئ يقرأ بشكل مباشر.
طيب إن شاء الله ممتاز. So the question is, can you play and listen to the Quran? Will this have the same effect and blessings of reciting the Quran? So Shaykh Mohammed mentioned that a person who listens to the Quran, there's a great reward in listening to the Quran. However, the one who recites the Quran, there's a greater reward. He secondly mentioned that when you listen to the Quran, it's not about listening to a recording of the Quran where the reward is. The reward is that it's greater reward that you hear it directly from someone who's reciting it in front of you. هل يوجد ثواب لمن يعني يستمع إلى المسجل؟
يعني هذا لا نستطيع الجزم به، لأن العلماء قالوا هذا ليس له حكم القارئ. يعني
نعم.
مثلا لو سمعتها السجدة التلاوة لا يسن السجود ولا يجب عند الحنفية، لأن
So,
هذا يعتبرونه مثل الصدى، يعني ليس له حكم القارئ. فإن شاء الله ما يخلو من ثواب، لكن لا نستطيع الجزم.
no, so Shaykh Omar said why? Because the ulama differ on recordings. Is a recording an actual qari? And in according to like the Hanafi school, if you're listening to an ayat of sajda, if you're listening to it from a cassette or from a recording or from a phone, then it doesn't take the ruling as someone who's reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you don't have wouldn't have performed the sajda. He said there's benefits, but Allahu alam if there's reward. But definitely there's a reward in hearing it directly from someone who's reciting it. That's where the reward definitely lies in, but not so much from devices. نعم. طيب السؤال هل ممكن واحد يفهم القرآن من باب ترجمة من مثلا واحد يقرأ ترجمة القرآن من بداية إلى النهاية ليفهم القرآن نعم هل ممكن واحد يفهم القرآن من ترجمة
يعني طبعا التراجم أنواع، فيبحث عن ترجمة موثوقة، يبحث عن ترجمة موثوقة من أهل العلم الذين يثق بهم. هذا أولا لابد أن يبحث عن ترجمة موثوقة.
Now, so the first thing the question was asked, can the Quran be understood just through its translation, reading it from beginning to end? And so Sheikh Mohammed said, yeah, there's a lot of translations out there, but as long as one is an authentic and confirmed translation, then there's benefit in that. That's first thing.
لكن الترجمة في نفس الوقت هي لا توصل إلا بعض المعاني، الترجمة توصل بعض المعاني.
However, translation only captivates part of the meaning, only some of the meaning, not all of the meaning.
وهي مفيدة فائدة عظيمة لفهم كثير من معاني كتاب الله عز وجل.
However, there is a benefit that a person can understand, I mean, parts of the Quran by using translations.
ومن استطاع أن يترقى إلى أعلى من ذلك يتعلم اللغة العربية.
And so a person who's able to, inshallah, to rise in degrees, if they really want to rise in degrees with the Quran, then they have to learn the Arabic language.
ثم يقرأ في كتب التفسير، لأن كتب التفسير كثيرة جدا، والمعاني الواسعة الكثيرة يجدها في كتب التفسير، وهذه كثير منها بل معظمها باللغة العربية، ولم يترجم أظن إلا الشيء النادر أو القليل.
Now, and so Shaykh Mohammed mentioned once a person now has got a grasp of the Arabic language, now they can access the books of tafsir in Arabic, where the meanings of the Quran are plentitude in those in those books of tafsir in Arabic language. And he said, and I don't think there's another language. There may be a few rare tafsirs in other than Arabic, but the vast majority of the exegesis of the Quran, the tafsirs, you're going to find in the Arabic language. Once a person has Arabic, now they can access those books to truly comprehend the meaning of the Quran.
وقالوا ما لا يدرك كله لا يترك كله، ما لا يدرك كله لا يترك كله، فإذا لم يتمكن من تعلم العربية نعم يقرأ في التراجم.
And so Sheikh Mohammed just mentioned an axiom there. He said, if you don't understand something, if you don't understand something, doesn't mean say that you leave all of it. So what he means is that if you're not a person who can grasp the Arabic language, you don't have the capacity or the time, etc., then just go to the translation to better your understanding, but realize that it's not giving you all the meanings of the Quran in one translation. Okay, طيب.
ويستمع إلى دروس الدروس التي هي في تدريس في تفسير القرآن من الشيوخ الذين يعني يوثق بعلمهم.
Masha, and then a person should also likewise, they should access classes of tafsir by affirmed teachers, mashallah, that know tafsir of Quran, and they can access them in their own languages to gain a greater understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نعم. واحد قال هنا كيف أنا أتجاوز بالتعب أو كسل عندما أقرأ القرآن. مثلا أنا أقرأ بالقوة في البداية لكن بعد القليل أتعب. كيف واحد يتجاوز عن هذا؟
يعني أولا ربنا عز وجل قال والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا، لا بد من مجاهدة النفس والهوى، نحن في دار التكليف دار المشقة، أكيد يعترينا الكسل لكن لابد أن نجاهد أنفسنا.
And so here the question was, how do I overcome physical fatigue that overcomes me when I seek to increase my recitation, even with incremental increases? Shaykh Muhammad gave the ayah from Surah Al-Ankabut where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who strive in our way, we will guide them to our paths. He said, there's no doubt that we have to strive. There has to be some type of striving. He said, we're in the abode of trials and being tired, etc. He said, but we have to strive to overcome that fatigue. No.
وعندما يتذكر الأجر العظيم والخير الكبير للتلاوة إن شاء الله هذا يجدد فيه الهمة إن شاء الله.
Inshallah, when we hear about the immense benefits of the Quran and the immense fruits of reciting from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, this will renew our resolve when we begin to recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
والبيئة لها أثر، يعني إذا جلس بين النائمين لا يقرأ، إذا جلس بين القارئين مع القارئين سيقرأ، يجلس في مكان فيه قارئون هذا يقرأ هذا يقرأ تنبعث فيه الهمة من البيئة والمحيط الذي فيه.
MashaAllah. So Sheikh Mohammed mentions that your environment really affects you. So if you're trying to read in a place where everyone is asleep, you're not going to read. You're going to end up going back asleep. But if you read in a place where there's lots of people reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So meaning your environment is going to affect you, where you read and who you read with, etc. That's going to affect your recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. واحد قال م- ما هو طريق بتقوية الحفظ القرآن؟
عفوا تعيد السؤال.
نعم، ما هو طريق لتقوية الحفظ القرآن؟
نعم نعم، يعني هناك سبحان الله طريقة مجربة إن شاء الله إذا اتبعها تماما إن شاء الله سيكون متقن للقرآن إتقان عجيب، يعني هذه طريقة مجربة.
Allahu Akbar.
آه،
Uh,
يعني نعم.
So the question is, how can someone strengthen their memory for memorization? Shaykh Mohammed mentioned there's a way here, inshallah, which is tried and tested. If a person does this, then inshallah, there'll be somebody who can memorize and have any perfection in memorizing the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
الطريقة تعتمد على قاعدة هي آه، يقلل من الحفظ ويكثر من المراجعة، يقلل من الحفظ ويكثر من المراجعة.
And so Shaykh Mohammed mentions here that in terms of memorization, the qa'idah is that you memorize a small amount and you do a lot of revision. A small amount with a lot of revision.
ثم عندما يحفظ، يأخذ صفحة مثلا يحفظها في يحاول أن يحفظها في أول النهار، هذه الصفحة، ثم يراجعها مرات متفرقة طيلة النهار،
So,
مرات متفرقة.
so Sheikh Mohammed draws the example that if someone, for example, memorized a page or a few ayahs in the morning time, then throughout the entire day, they revise that throughout the entire day. In the times that they're free, they revise what they've memorized in the morning throughout the entire day.
ثم يحاول أن يراجع ما حفظه في كل يوم إلى أن يكثر فيقسمه إلى أيام.
And so here, and then a person should likewise also, not just that they finish at the end of the day, but every single day, they should try and revise what they've memorized little by little. They should try and revise what they've memorized little by little, that part that they've memorized.
حتى إذا استطاع أن يراجع في كل يوم 5 أجزاء، 5 أجزاء، هذا أفضل، فيثبت الحفظ. من قرأ الخمسة لم ينسى.
If a person who can memorize or revise, sorry, revise 5 juz a day, they say who revises five every day will not forget. من يقرأ الخمسة لا ينسى. Whoever recites 5 juz a day, they won't forget. Meaning whatever you've memorized, if you recite it bit by bit every single day, you're going to retain it.
إذا تيسر له من يعني ينظر له في المصحف وهو يقرأ حتى يطمئن لحفظه، هذا يكون أحسن. يستعين من يسمع له،
عفوا عاد مرة ثانية.
يعني يستعين عندما أراجع يكون أمامي واحد يمسك المصحف حتى أتثبت من صحة الحفظ إذا أمكن.
Now, so if a person can, to aid him, they should have someone who sits in front of them with the mushaf, and they're looking at the mushaf while they're reading to ensure that what they're reading is correct.
كثرة المراجعة هي أهم شيء، أهم شيء كثرة المراجعة، يكثر من المراجعة عن ظهر قلب.
Now, and so Shaykh Muhammad mentioned the most important thing is a plentitude of revision of what you've memorized. Plentitude of revision because what the more that you revise, it will purify your heart.
وعندما يحفظ ويراجع لا يكون أمامه ملهيات، يعني يكون هكذا متجه بذهنه اتجاه تام ومركز على الحفظ والمراجعة، يعني يزيل ما يشغله في ذلك المكان الذي هو فيه يعني.
And so Sheikh Mohammed mentioned when a person does memorize, they should remove all distractions from them. There shouldn't be anything else that takes their attention away. They should be just focusing on the mushaf, on what they're memorizing, closing their eyes and memorizing it, and not be distracted with anything else around them. It has to be a place free of any distractions.
نعم.
نعم. نعم. هذا هو نعم. نعم هذا كله. آه، انتهت الأسئلة.
إيه الوقت انتهى أيضا.
نعم نعم نعم.
إيه الله يجزيكم الخير، أكرمكم الله.
آمين
إن
آمين.
شاء الله.
دعوتك ادعوا لنا من فضلك، رتب الفاتحة وادعوا لنا من فضلك.
الله يحفظكم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم اجعلنا إخوة متحابين في جلالك، وظلنا تحت ظل عرشك يوم لا ظل إلا ظلك. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. اللهم ارزقنا الهمة في تلاوة القرآن. اللهم ثبت القرآن في صدورنا، احفظنا من نسيانه، وارزقنا تلاوته آناء الليل وأطراف النهار. اللهم اجعل من أهل القرآن، وارزقنا فهم القرآن والعمل بالقرآن، وشفعه فينا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، والحمد لله رب العالمين. أكرمكم الله. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. الله يبارك فيكم، نستودعكم الله
شيخ
نستودعكم.
محمد، الله يبارك فيكم، نتشرف بحضوركم ما شاء الله، نورتنا
حفظكم الله.
بحضوركم.
استغفر الله. استغفر الله. الله يحفظكم يا سيدي. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته، جزاك الله خير.
حياكم يا سيدي.
ما شاء الله. MashaAllah, after that enlightening, MashaAllah, reminder by Shaykh Mohammed, Alhamdulillah, we're now joined by our next guest, inshallah, Dr. Shahid Bukhari, MashaAllah, who's a Unani medicine practitioner, a naturopath, and also a homeopath and acupuncturist. Just a brief introduction to Sheikh Shahid. Shahid Bukhari is a highly experienced Unani medicine practitioner with an expertise in homeopathy, iridology, herbal medicine, and acupuncture. With extensive clinical experience in Manchester and London, he integrates traditional Unani principles with modern holistic practices to support patient well-being. As the founder and principal of a diploma program in Unani medicine, he has trained numerous practitioners in both the theoretical and practical aspects of this traditional healing system. His experience includes pulse analysis, temperament assessment, hijama, tongue acupuncture, and bespoke herbal formulations. Beyond clinical practice, Shahid is a sought-after speaker and educator, delivering the workshops and talks across the UK and internationally. His book, The Foundations of Unani Medicine, is available at Mustafa Mount Bookstore, with proceeds supporting Greensville Trust. Inshallah, tonight he'll be sharing insights on diet in Ramadan, drawing from both Unani principles and his clinical expertise to offer practical guidance for maintaining health and balance during fasting. And without further ado, mashallah, we're blessed to have him in our presence. Please, Shahid, tafaddal bismillah. If you can just unmute, okay, if you can unmute your microphone. Jazakallah khair.
So can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you. We can see you and hear
Okay.
you. Alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah, Sheikh Amir, thank you very much for the introduction. I
Um,
appreciate that, and thank you for inviting me. Inshallah, this will be a beneficial talk. Can you hear me clearly, though?
Yes, we can hear you fine, mashallah. Perfect. Perfect, inshallah.
So, A'udhu billahi min shaitanir Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the talk today, it's going to be about health and diet in Ramadan, and just see. Okay, inshallah, today we're going to give a brief introduction, and we're going to talk about the brief introduction, key takeaways, health benefits of fasting, prophetic food, and meal planning. And the key takeaways today is understanding the health benefits of fasting, identify prophetic foods and their benefits, learn practical dietary strategies for suhoor and iftar, manage common health issues during fasting, develop a personalized health goals for Ramadan. So bridging the science of the health and spirituality. So fasting is like a regeneration of the body, the mind, and the soul. As you said in the Quran, it is better for you that you fast if you only knew. Scientific sort of insights, fasting promotes autophagy, reduces inflammation, and supports coagulation. So in other words, it gives it an opportunity for the body to regenerate cells or repair cells, because if we're constantly eating, it doesn't give the body enough opportunity to repair. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, inshallah. Other benefits, increases brain function and slows down aging, reduces inflammation, helps with conditions like arthritis. So foods, generally, certain foods, especially things like gluten, can increase inflammation. And other some types of arthritis is also inflammation related. So that's why when you fast, the benefits are the reduction of inflammation and the also conditions like arthritis and many other conditions, and they're also preventative. Promotes the secretion of human growth hormone, which is important for muscle and fat metabolism. Okay, so during Ramadan, a lot of us experience headaches, and especially the beginning, the first few days, we tend to sort of suffer that, and that can be to do with obviously hydration, but before Ramadan, we tend to drink a lot of caffeine, like coffee and tea. And then suddenly, when we're not drinking those during those months, those hours, the effects are things like headaches and lethargy and things like that. So the idea really is to start early now, in effect. Inshallah, in the next few days, Ramadan's going to start. Ideally, we should have started a month before with our preparation in terms of maybe reduction in caffeine and things like that, so that it's easier. And so I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about some meal suggestions, some suggestions that you could probably take away with you, and some things that you probably should be avoiding during this time. So dates and milk is a good sunnah combination that provides a sustained energy during the day for suhoor. Barley porridge, dalbina, with honey, supports digestion and reduces stress. Wholemeal bread. I mean, during the Prophet's time, there wasn't access to much wheat, especially during the Makkah period, but it was mainly barley bread. And but however, wholemeal bread with some olive oil and black seed is a good pairing, or with healthy fats like olive oil, avocado, and proteins like eggs and yogurt to help sort of cook energy crashes. Because what happens is if you have just bread, you're going to get an energy spike, and then you'll then feel tired afterwards because carbohydrates give you the energy, but they don't sustain you. That's why it's good to sort of have a combination with some fats. And another possible option is sourdough bread. For a lot of people have issues with glucose um, because what happens is wheat in particular can cause, as I said earlier, inflammation in the body for pretty much all of us really, but especially certain people suffer more. And so you can maybe look for other options. Barley is a good option. Sourdough, sprouted varieties for sort of like a better digestion. Other options are nabis, which is dates which are soaked in water. It's really good for hydration and improves digestion. Greek yogurt with nuts and figs, which are basically a rich source of calcium and fiber. Then in the evening, if iftar, dates and water, basically a sunnah breaking the fast. Lentil soup with olive oil and coriander. Coriander is said to be cooling, and olive oil it's very nourishing, and this combination helps to more easy to digest. Roast lamb or chicken with barley bread, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a prophetic diet. Pumpkin soup. Prophet ﷺ liked pumpkin, as we all know, which is light and nutritious. Chickpeas salad with olive oil and lemon, which is a healthy choice and a fiber rich. So a lot of the things that to be honest with you, a lot of people when we open our fast with a lot of fried food, um, sweets, sugary things, um, caffeine. You get your samosas, pakoras, and all the things that a lot of us like. They're not really the ones you want to be opening your fast with. Maybe swap the fried foods with baked and grilled options. Replace the sugary stuff with fruits and yogurt. Look for whole grain or refined carbs, because refined carbs, basically, as most of us know, that they give you an energy spike, but they're not really good they're not really good for you in terms of fiber, and can cause other issues like digestive issues, constipation, and that sort of stuff. When we drink water, we should really be drinking in sips and not gulps. In Islamic medicine and Iranian medicine, we don't encourage this drinking gulps because it causes issues with the liver. And again, this is from our traditions. Excessively cold water immediately after fasting is also not a good thing. Really, room temperature water. Or even warm water is actually much better for you. And again, I mentioned earlier about Nabiz, which is the infused water, which is very good for hydration. Because the big problem is a lot of the reasons we have headaches and things like that is, other than caffeine, is the lack of fluids. Avoid caffeinated drinks and opt for herbal teas. All teas are, to some extent, drying. What they come under the term of um, sort of like astringents or drying. But the other teas, they are least drying, but they also have other benefits. Yeah. So, mint tea, for example, is very good, refreshing. So look for nutrient-dense meals, so obviously we're talking about generally here, general sort of advice, but if there's anything more specific for you have a sort of chronic condition, you probably want to seek a healthcare provider. One of the things that we look in Unani medicine or prophetic medicine, Islamic medicine, is that we look, its diet is based on the mizaj. And we get hints from that from the Sunnah and from Hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ used to have dates with cucumber or melon. And because, as mentioned, at least that the heat of one negates the coolness, so it causes like a balance. So that's the same concept we use in Iranian medicine, like a balanced food. If you are eating something warm, you want something cooling to sort of balance that. And also your mizaj has a big factor in this, what your own personal mizaj is. So if you yourself are hot and dry, you should be avoiding hot and dry food. It's just going to aggravate your condition. This is not just in Ramadan, but generally you're a hot and dry person and you're eating hot and dry foods, uh, like spicy, for example, you're going to be struggling with conditions that you're potentially prone to, like skin conditions. On the other hand, if you're the opposite, cold and moist, then you probably can have more spicy food, but you don't want to eat very cooling foods, you know? So that's the thing that we have to be aware of. So here I'm mentioning about the different personality types. Sorry, apologies. Temperament types. So what we call a Bulgami temperament or phlegmatic temperament is somebody who's, I just mentioned, cold and moist. So they are looking for more warming and lighter foods. Ginger tea, lentil soup, black pepper. Have you noticed it's got a bit of heat in there? They need to probably exercise. We all need to exercise, but the phlegmatic types probably needs the most exercise because I mentioned earlier that because they're cold and moist. So when you are cold, you need heat, and exercise generates heat. For the opposite, the Sofravi temperament, which is a choleric, which is hot and dry, They obviously need more cooling foods like cucumber, yogurt, leafy greens, melons, those type of things. And as I said, they need to avoid spicy fried foods. And if you're a choleric, that's the type of food you like. So you need to be extra careful. For a Dhammavi person, which is sanguine, who is hot and moist, they need more of balanced type foods like fresh fruits, vegetables, lean protein, moderate carbs they can get away with. They need to stay hydrated. Why? Because they're hot and they can do light exercise. They don't need to do excessive exercise, a small amount of exercise, they will gain muscle. And finally, the Sodavi temperament, they tend to be cold, or melancholic, they tend to be cold and dry. And they would, because they're cold, as I mentioned, they need more warming, easy digestible foods, stews, dates. Dates, remember, are warm and moist. A moderate use of healthy fats. They need to be focusing on routine because they're very routine-driven people. And moderate exercise, we don't want them to do too much exercise. Why? Because remember I said they're cold and dry, it's going to dry them up, and they need enough sleep. So we should never skip a suhoor, but there are people that skip suhoor or they hardly eat anything. I think it's very common when I see in my clinic a lot of people, sadly, a lot of females, they don't eat. We talk about suhoor, but even breakfast, they don't eat breakfast because they think by skipping breakfast they are going to lose weight. And so your suhoor is very important to eat adequately. In fact, probably that's your free pass. That's the only time you can eat as much as you want to, really. Evening time is not going anywhere. Okay. Drinking tea will keep you hydrated. That's what people think. I remember I said to you, it's a diuretic. It's also astringent, but it's also a diuretic. It makes you go to the bathroom, so you're losing water then. Dates causes weight gain? Not true. They provide a lot of natural energy and fiber. So you need to set like personal goals. Stay hydrated. I mean, 6 to 8 glasses is probably excessive. I mean, for some people, but you need to drink enough water. If you're thirsty, you should be drinking water. There's no specific. I mean, there's a myth about 2 liters. Is that there's no evidence at all. People are perpetuating this myth regularly that there is 2 liters of water. There's no evidence for that. You need 2 glasses of fluids in the body. Okay, but if you're thirsty, you need to drink water. I would say during Ramadan, I would say include more prophetic foods in your meals. Spiritually, we're looking to increase our connection with the Quran and Sunnah, inshallah. I'm thinking that maybe I wanted to include a little bit common things, common conditions that you'd probably be experiencing during Ramadan. One of them is constipation. It's very common that people report that they suffer from constipation. So we need to increase more fiber. So those pakoras, samosas, they're not your friend. You need to increase more fiber. Indigestion, avoid overeating and fried food. There's a lot of overeating. People just really eat a lot. Actually, this is a time to maybe, I mean, personally, I mean, everyone has their own sort of way of doing things. Personally, I eat roughly the same. The first 10 days, this is my own thing. And then the next 10 days, I drop the amount of food. And then the last 10 days, I drop even more food. And then I actually find myself more energized. It's a myth that we think, oh, the more we eat, the more energy we'll get. It's really not necessary. And people eat so much, and when they're going to read the Tarawih, and then they're struggling. So stay hydrated and balanced. Headaches, that's another one. as I said earlier, right at the beginning, try to reduce caffeine now, from today, if you can. So things become a little easier when Ramadan starts, inshallah. And then low blood sugar, limit refined sugar, eat complex carbs at suhoor. Now, eating sugar, so sugar is a whole, we don't have time to go through this, but white sugar, which is common, white sugar really is really bad for you. It's very harmful in many ways. And sugar really in what we get in this country, white sugar is not even cane sugar. So really, honey is good. It's very good, obviously. And if you do have maybe something like jaggery, which is unrefined sugar, that's okay. We include that in our medicines when we preparations, or medicine preparations. Decrease sugar gradually, caffeine and nicotine, because you'd want to do this in a stage by stage. Adjust your sleep patterns before Ramadan starts. Set intentions for spiritual and physical well-being. Yeah. So really, if we start this pattern now, things are not going to be so, it'd be just easier. So finally, I wanted to say the real healer is the one who created you. So no physician, no doctor, no Hakim, nobody can actually heal you. There's two things. There is an ability inside you that actually heals you. There's something inside you that heals you, okay? Ancient people believe that. All traditions, all Eastern traditions, even up to relatively recently, we believe that something inside you actually heals you. The physician's role is to just facilitate that healing process. But ultimately, you get better if I decrease it. Balance your food, your sleep, your work, and your spirituality. So the word is balance. So, we leave the least amount of time for spiritual aspect of it. And probably the most time we spend is work, and then sleep, and then food, and then spirituality. But I think it's the other way. But we need to reflect on that. Time to reflect, yeah. Eat in moderation and follow the sunnah of fasting. Remember, the Son of Man doesn't fill any vessel worse than his stomach. That's most of the conditions, most of the illnesses are caused because of your eating the wrong foods, eating too much, wrong foods for your mizaj, your temperament, eating excessively. Most of the conditions are that. I mean, we all know about that. I'm sure you hear it all the time that, have 1/3 for food, 1/3 for air, 1/3 for water. But to be honest with you, that's half hadith. Is not the complete order. Really, it's just enough for a son of man to eat 1, 2, 3 morsels. If they need more than that, then they can have up to 1/3. That's the maximum. So I think 1/3. That's if you stick with that, you won't need to see anybody, inshallah. I think that's all I have today. I'm open for questions, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Shahid, bye. So there's some questions here in the Q&A. The
Okay.
first one is, how does one know which temperament they are?
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the same question twice. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Right. So what temperament there? So the temperament, there's a few ways of identifying what your temperament is. Yeah. Uh, I would say the simplest way is to go on my website, and it's for free. It doesn't cost you anything. I'm not selling your website. But on my website, my name, shahidbukhari.co.uk, there's a quiz. You fill up the quiz, and at the end of the quiz, it will tell you what your temperament type is. It's about 8, 10 questions you have to answer, like, your the types of food you like, the sleep patterns, and that up from there, your hair. For example, somebody has very thick, wavy hair, there's a lot of heat in them. Basically, somebody has straight hair, they're going to be more moist. Yeah. So, somebody who gains weight easily, they're going to have more cold in them. Somebody who's very thin and lean, they're going to be dry. Yeah. So those type of things, but it's just go in there and fill up those that quiz, and then that'll give you your temperament, inshallah.
Stuff like that. The second question was, is brown sugar, Demerara sugar, healthy for you?
Yeah, so brown sugar is fine. So essentially what they do is they get the sugar cane, and when they squeeze the sugar cane, right? I don't know if I mean, have you seen it? They squeeze the sugar cane,
Yeah.
and then they put in big like a thing, and then they collect it, and then they heat it up. That first stage is a raw stage. And then they break it up, they put some oil on it, and that becomes demurrer sugar. That's the breaking up process. But if you can get it before the breaking up process, it's the best thing to have. And that's actually, we use it in medicine. For example, we use a bit of that in some cumin seeds, and that helps with children with constipation, things like that. So it's medicine, but white sugar is harmful.
Yeah. Okay, Jazakallah khair. And also, another question here is, what would you recommend for IBS constipation?
Okay. So IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Yeah. So irritable bowel syndrome. So what the Western doctors do is that because this is one of the conditions, they don't know what it means. So they put it under a category of IBS. And it means that it's a syndrome. They don't know what's going on. So, so essentially, what it is, we in our medicine, we divide this into different types of IBS. So there's IBS with gas, IBS with constipation, IBS with diarrhea, and etc. So it depends on the different types of IBS, and we treat it accordingly. So it's a bit of a more complicated issue, but it will mean some medicines. It wouldn't be just be able to take it. They're at the stage where it's quite chronic.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah, really beautiful and insightful, MashaAllah, presentation. Hopefully, inshallah, we can all benefit by preparing properly for Ramadan, inshallah, before it comes, inshallah. Also, just to make mention once again that our dear beloved teacher here, Shahid Bukhari, he also has a book which he's recently published as well, which can be purchased, inshallah, at Mustafa Mount, or the link can be put up there, inshallah, on Unani Medicine, it's definitely a must read, mashallah, for anyone who wants, optimal health, inshallah. Definitely look at that book. But Jazakallah khair, thank you so much for joining us tonight, mashallah. I know you're very busy, mashallah. And inshallah, for everyone else, the program will continue, inshallah, tomorrow at 8 p.m. over the next few days at 8 o'clock, inshallah. Please be sure to log in and join in, inshallah. They've put the link up now at Furthest Boundary Press, inshallah. You can see that for Dr. Shahid's book, inshallah, that can be purchased. But Jazakallah khair, thank you so much. And likewise, also his web page is up there as well for people who want to go through the temperament test to see what temperament they are. Then inshallah they can begin accessing the relevant information for that. Jazakallah khair wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين في كل لحظة نبض خلقي رضا نفسي وزين دارشي من كلماته. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. There's just two things here. Two things have come up quickly. Oh, okay, so this is a question for yourself. I don't know what to ask me. Is it okay to overeat more at suhoor time and eating complex carbs and protein and good fats?
Yes, yeah, you can overeat. That's probably the only time you can eat more. That's the best way you have your free pass.
That's normally, even like in Yemen, when we were in Yemen, they usually suhoor, they have a bigger suhoor than they do iftar.
Right.
Like usually bigger, they have their main meal at suhoor time.
Okay.
Another question here was, what would you suggest for a new diagnosed diabetic?
Exercise. So the problem is there's two types of diabetes. Obviously, there's the type 1 and type 2. If you have type 2 and you've just been diagnosed, yeah. To be honest with you, it's called a modern disease. It's very rare. Even when I was growing up, to be honest with you, it was very rare. We hear somebody said, oh, so person's got sugar or diabetes, and we would think, what is that? As we was children, we never heard about it. It's rare. Now it's on the increase, especially in the Asian community. the subcontinent community, because there's no activity. We don't, you get up you get up in the morning and then you sit at the table, then you don't get in your car and you eat your biryanis, and you're not getting any exercise. So exercise is really the most important thing, to be honest with you, as much as possible, and obviously avoid certain foods that we need. Certain sugar, obviously sugar is not your friend.
Okay, excellent, mashallah. And then the last question here, inshallah. If you're hot and dry, wouldn't hot and dry foods be most suitable? Is that
No. No. So we believe in the concept of opposites. So whatever mizaj you are, and we get this from a reference from the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, where Prophet ﷺ said that if you have dates, you should have some like melon or cucumber to the heat of one will cut the. I'm just paraphrasing it, but in effect, you don't want to eat the same. You want to eat the opposite. So if you're a hot and dry person, you want generally to include more cold and moist foods.
okay? Excellent, mashallah. And then I think there's one last one here. How do you treat hypothyroidism and a different person with different heart problems?
Okay, so these are like these are very specific medical conditions that would need time to explain. But in fact, that organ, that thyroid gland is not secreting the what the body needs, and it's a bit of complex condition that I would need to spend. We couldn't do obviously explaining this briefly, but the heart problems. There's just so many heart problems. Is it heart palpitations, arrhythmia, things like that? And there are definitely treatments for that, but even need time to diagnose and find out what the specific heart problem is. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Jazakallah khair. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.